Hi guys, my name is Jared. Today we want to look at Genesis 1 through 11, and we want to look at what's the biblical basis of multiplication from these chapters in particular. So if you got your Bibles, go ahead and open them up to Genesis chapter 1, and let me ask you a question. What is the first command that God gave us? If you grew up in church, a lot of times what we've always been taught is the first command given to Adam and Eve was to be fruitful and increase in number. And in fact, we see that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. But if that is the case, if that's what God designed us to do, then by Genesis chapter 6, the entire world is filled with people, and that command is finished. But why in Genesis chapter 6 does he wipe mankind off the face of the earth except for Noah and his family? And I would like to suggest that what we were taught in Sunday school in verse 28 is only part of the first command. If you got your Bible, look at verse 26 of Genesis chapter 1 with me. This is what it says there. It says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And then in verse 28, he tells them, be fruitful and increase in number. What were they to increase? And I would like to suggest that it is the glory of the Lord. It's his image that's found in verse 26 and verse 27. Just like a mirror reflects whatever is shown in front of it, the way God designed us was to be mirrors on the face of the earth, so that when he saw the earth, he would see his glory reflected back to himself through us and through his creation. And in fact, if we take that one step farther, they were to reflect that glory across the face of the earth from one corner to the next. Every square inch was to be filled with his glory. And we see that is God's plan. We know the rest of the story. We know what goes wrong in Genesis chapter 3 with the fall of man, and that image is marred because of sin entering the world. But mankind continues to increase in number. They continue to multiply. But by Genesis chapter 6, they have multiplied the wrong thing. They have multiplied themselves, not the image of God. So much so that when God looks at the world, he is grieved in his spirit, and he decides to cause a flood to happen. But he saves Noah because of his righteousness in that generation. He saves Noah and his family. And through Noah, the promise continues. And when Noah comes off the boat in Genesis chapter 9, the command is repeated in verse 1, chapter 9. It says, "Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." Once again, God expected Noah not just to populate the world, but instead he expected him to take that glory, his righteousness, and cover the face of the world with it. Well, there's one more challenge here in Genesis chapter 11. We see that the story continues through Genesis chapter 10 with the Table of Nations, but in chapter 11 we have the story of the Tower of Babel. And again, if we go back to Sunday school, what we've always been taught, what went wrong in Genesis chapter 11, is the guys wanted to take God's glory for themselves. But read with me here. Look specifically at what they say in verse 3. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and make them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to heaven, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." The problem here, yes, they wanted to accept God's glory for themselves. They wanted to steal it. But the second problem is they didn't want to be scattered the way that God had designed it. They didn't want to fan out so that when God saw the whole world, he saw his glory. Instead, they wanted to congregate. There wasn't anything wrong with making a high-rise, making a tower. Instead, the problem was they were not fulfilling the command of God. And here in these 11 chapters, we see a couple of things, a couple of natures of man that we need to avoid. One, from chapter 11, the idea that we congregate and we bring everybody in, and bigger is better. That was the problem in Genesis chapter 11. They didn't want to be scattered across the face of the earth, but instead they wanted to make a name for themselves. The other thing we see is from our beginning, from the time that God made us in Genesis chapter 1, his plan, his design, was for those of us who believe in Jesus, for those of us who know him, is to carry his glory, his image, to the nations across the face of the earth. This is God's plan, and the only question for us is whether or not we're going to join him or whether we're going to live like they did prior to the flood time.